I was reviewing quarterly marketing reports at my downtown Dallas office when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Monica from First National Bank delivered news that shattered my world in seconds. My childhood home in suburban Oak Cliff was 3 days from foreclosure due to $87,000 in unpaid gambling debts. My parents, Frank and Barbara, had secretly used my house as collateral, without my knowledge. As Monica explained the forged signature implications, my hands trembled while staring at family photos on my desk, feeling completely betrayed and financially vulnerable. 5 years of 90-hour work weeks had built my digital marketing company from a cramped studio apartment into a thriving business with 12 employees and major corporate clients. After graduating from the University of Texas with a business degree, I had poured every ounce of energy into establishing myself in the competitive Dallas market. Those late nights researching consumer behavior patterns, cold calling potential clients, and perfecting campaign strategies had finally paid off when I landed my first 6-figure contract with a regional restaurant chain. 3 years ago, I had felt such pride purchasing my childhood home from Frank and Barbara for $230,000. The modest brick ranch house on Maple Street represented everything I had worked toward. While I lived comfortably in my modern downtown condo, I kept the family house as a rental property, charging fair market rates to a young couple who maintained the lawn beautifully and sent rent payments punctually each month. My father, Frank, had worked construction for 30 years, building shopping centers and office complexes across North Texas until his retirement. His calloused hands and sun-weathered face told stories of honest labor under scorching summer heat. Barbara had served as a school secretary for 22 years, organizing student records and managing parent communications with patience that amazed teachers. They had always seemed financially responsible, living modestly, and discussing retirement plans with careful consideration. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs that had emerged gradually over recent months. Frank began asking unusual questions about my income during family dinners, wondering about commission structures and client retainer fees with curiosity that felt intrusive. Barbara requested copies of my bank statements, claiming they needed them for tax preparation assistance, though I had handled my own taxes for years. They started borrowing small amounts frequently, $20 here for groceries, $50 there for prescription medications, always promising quick repayment that somehow never materialized. After ending Monica's devastating call, I drove straight to Oak Cliff, my mind racing through implications I could barely comprehend. The familiar neighborhood streets looked different somehow, as if the foundation of my entire understanding had shifted beneath me. I parked in the driveway where I had learned to ride my bicycle, now seeing the cracked concrete and overgrown hedges through the lens of potential loss. Inside the living room with its faded floral wallpaper and worn brown carpet, I confronted Frank and Barbara with trembling voice and documents from Monica. Initially, they denied everything, claiming some mistake must have occurred at the bank. Frank's eyes darted nervously toward Barbara, who twisted her wedding ring with obvious anxiety. Their denials crumbled when I mentioned the forged signatures specifically. Frank's emotional breakdown surprised me with its raw intensity. This strong man, who had built structures with his bare hands, sobbed into his weathered palms, admitting that his gambling addiction had started innocently with weekly poker games among construction coworkers. What began as harmless entertainment had escalated into online betting accounts, sports wagering, and casino visits that consumed every spare dollar they possessed. Barbara disappeared into their bedroom, returning with a shoebox filled with paperwork that made my stomach turn. Inside were dozens of forged documents, including credit applications, loan paperwork, and practice sheets where she had perfected my signature. Seeing my own name written repeatedly in my mother's handwriting felt surreal and violating simultaneously. The most chilling discovery was a spiral notebook containing pages of my signature practiced in different pens and styles. Frank had researched my banking patterns, noting when I typically made large deposits or withdrawals. They had studied my financial habits like criminals casing a target, which I realized was exactly what they had become. Through tears and desperate explanations, Frank revealed the full scope of their financial destruction. They had lost their retirement savings, borrowed against their car, taken a second mortgage on their own home, and finally targeted my property when all other options were exhausted. The $87,000 debt represented months of accumulated gambling losses, compounded by high interest rates and penalty fees. Barbara's justification cut deeper than any amount of money could. She insisted that they had raised me, supported my education, and deserved help during their crisis. Her words implied that my success was somehow theirs by right, that filial obligations superseded legal boundaries and personal autonomy. The woman who had taught me about honesty and integrity was now demanding that I enable their criminal behavior because of biological relationships. Standing in that familiar living room, surrounded by childhood memories and evidence of betrayal, I felt the first crack in my willingness to assist them. The parents who had shaped my moral foundation were asking me to abandon those very principles to solve problems they had created through choices I never would have approved. Their transformation from role models into criminals targeting their own daughter marked the beginning of a battle I never imagined I would have to fight. Driving home to my condo, I discovered 17 missed calls lighting up my phone like a Christmas tree. Text messages flooded in faster than I could read them, creating a digital avalanche of family drama that left me feeling overwhelmed and trapped. My chest tightened as I realized that Frank and Barbara had orchestrated something far more manipulative than simple desperation. Aunt Patricia called before I could even park in my building's garage. Her voice carried disappointment and disbelief as she expressed shock that I would go back on my word to help Frank and Barbara during their crisis. Confusion washed over me as I realized she believed I had already promised to cover their gambling debts, but was now backing out like some heartless daughter who had forgotten her obligations. The manipulation became crystal clear as more family members contacted me throughout the evening. My parents had called every relative, telling them that I had agreed to pay the $87,000, but was having second thoughts due to greed and selfishness. They had painted themselves as victims of my broken promises rather than perpetrators of forgery and fraud. Cousin Danny, whom I had helped secure his first job at a local marketing firm, left a voicemail expressing profound disappointment in my selfishness. His words stung because I had spent hours coaching him through interview preparation and portfolio development, celebrating his success like a proud sister. Now he questioned my character based on lies my parents had spread throughout our extended family network. Uncle Robert, a retired police officer with 30 years of law enforcement experience, called to lecture me about family loyalty. His stern voice reminded me of childhood visits when he would arrive in uniform, commanding respect through his authoritative presence. He suggested that success had made me too good for my family, that I had forgotten the people who supported me before achieving financial independence. The guilt tactics felt suffocating as relatives reminded me of Christmas gifts, birthday celebrations, and college graduation support that Frank and Barbara had provided over the years. Each conversation painted my parents as selfless givers who deserved assistance during their darkest hour, while portraying me as an ungrateful daughter who valued money over family bonds. My phone continued buzzing throughout the night with messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends who had received carefully crafted versions of our conflict. Barbara had reached out to her sisters, describing sleepless nights worrying about homelessness, while their successful daughter refused to help. Frank had contacted his brothers, expressing shame about having raised a child who would abandon parents during desperate times. The isolation felt crushing as family members chose sides without understanding the complete truth about forgery, fraud, and criminal behavior. They saw only what my parents had shown them, a narrative of parental need and filial rejection that cast me as the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. Wednesday morning brought an escalation that invaded my professional sanctuary. Frank and Barbara appeared in my office building's parking lot at 7:30, positioning themselves near the employee entrance with tear-streaked faces and desperate expressions. They waited for me to arrive, creating a public spectacle that attracted attention from coworkers and potential clients. Barbara's breakdown in the parking lot felt calculated and theatrical. She sobbed loudly about losing their home, describing sleepless nights and medication they could no longer afford. Her performance drew sympathetic glances from people entering the building, making me appear cold and uncaring as I tried to walk past them toward the entrance. Frank's approach differed but proved equally manipulative. He spoke in hushed tones about family reputation and what would happen to relationships if I continued refusing to help them. His veiled threats suggested that my decision would permanently damage bonds with relatives who mattered to me, creating consequences that would extend far beyond financial considerations. The pressure intensified when they followed me into the building lobby, continuing their emotional appeals in front of my assistant and several clients who had arrived for morning meetings. Their public desperation tactics forced me into an impossible position where helping them appeared normal and refusing seemed heartless and cruel. Throughout these encounters, I began noticing how my parents had transformed our family dynamics into weapons against me. They leveraged every relationship, every shared memory, and every moment of past support as ammunition in their campaign to access my assets. Their desperation had evolved beyond simple need into sophisticated emotional manipulation designed to break down my resistance through guilt and public pressure. That evening, as I sat in my condo reviewing the day's chaotic events, I realized that my parents viewed my success not as my personal achievement, but as their family resource. They had spent months, possibly longer, researching ways to access my assets and overcome my potential objections. Their gambling addiction had created more than financial problems. It had transformed them into predators targeting their own daughter with the same cunning they might use against strangers. The weight of family expectations pressed down on me like a physical force, making it difficult to think clearly about my options. Every conversation with relatives reinforced their version of events, creating an echo chamber where my perspective was dismissed as selfishness, and their demands were validated as reasonable family support. I found myself questioning my own judgment, wondering if successful people really did owe their families unlimited financial assistance, regardless of the circumstances that created the need. But beneath the guilt and pressure, a small voice reminded me that enabling criminal behavior was not the same as supporting family members in crisis. The forgery, fraud, and manipulation represented choices my parents had made consciously, not unfortunate circumstances beyond their control. As the pressure mounted from all directions, I realized that I needed to investigate further, suspecting there might be even more to discover about their activities and intentions. Jake had always been my little brother. Even at 28 years old, I had protected him through middle school bullying, helped him navigate community college applications, and used my business connections to secure his position at Morrison Construction Company. Our relationship felt genuine and supportive, built on shared childhood memories and mutual respect that had grown stronger as we became adults. During Sunday dinner at Frank and Barbara's house the week after the bank incident, I noticed something different about Jake's behavior that set off subtle alarm bells in my intuition. When our parents mentioned specific details about my recent business contracts and property investments, Jake's discomfort was visible in his fidgeting hands and averted gaze. His knowledge of information that should have been private struck me as suspicious, especially given the timing of these revelations. That Tuesday evening, I decided to review personal documents I kept at my condo, searching for any evidence of unauthorized access. My filing system was meticulous, with important papers organized in labeled folders within a locked desk drawer. As I examined bank statements and business contracts, I discovered subtle signs that someone had photographed these documents rather than simply reading them. Slight misalignment and minor fingerprint smudges suggested careful handling by someone trying to avoid detection. The evidence pointed toward Jake because he was the only family member who had visited my condo recently for our monthly sibling dinner. During his last visit 3 weeks earlier, I had stepped out to accept a delivery from the building's front desk, leaving him alone in my living space for approximately 10 minutes. That time frame would have been sufficient to photograph multiple documents if he had come prepared with that intention. Confronting Jake at his apartment Thursday evening required courage I had never needed with my brother before. His modest one-bedroom unit reflected his construction worker income, with simple furniture and sports memorabilia decorating walls that needed fresh paint. When I knocked on his door carrying a folder of evidence, his expression shifted from welcome to wariness in seconds. Jake's initial denials felt hollow and rehearsed, as if he had prepared responses for this exact conversation. He claimed ignorance about Frank and Barbara's gambling problems, insisting he had no knowledge of their financial schemes. His defensive posture and inability to maintain eye contact contradicted the confident, straightforward brother I had known throughout our lives. The breakthrough came when I presented specific examples of information only he could have accessed. Details about my Galveston Beach house purchase, including the exact mortgage amount and property tax assessments, had appeared in our parents' conversations with suspicious accuracy. Jake's face crumpled as he realized the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. His confession emerged slowly, like water leaking from a cracked dam. Frank and Barbara had approached him 2 months earlier, explaining their desperate financial situation and requesting his help in understanding my assets. They promised him $10,000 from money they expected to receive from me, framing their request as temporary assistance that would benefit everyone involved. Jake revealed the depth of his betrayal through specific examples that left me feeling sick to my stomach. During family gatherings, he had photographed my bank statements while I prepared meals in the kitchen. He had memorized details from business contracts I occasionally reviewed at their house, noting client names and payment schedules that my parents later used to estimate my income accurately. The most painful discovery was learning that Jake had provided architectural details about my beach house, including floor plans, room dimensions, and property boundaries that he had sketched during a visit I had intended as a brotherly bonding experience. What I remembered as quality time together had actually been reconnaissance for their criminal enterprise, targeting my most treasured asset. Jake's justification revealed how thoroughly my parents had manipulated him as well. They had convinced him that I was being selfish and unreasonable, that family loyalty demanded he help them understand my financial capacity to assist during their crisis. They portrayed his information gathering as mediation rather than betrayal, suggesting he was helping facilitate family reconciliation. Frank and Barbara had exploited Jake's financial vulnerability just as they were targeting mine. His construction job provided steady income but little savings, making the promised $10,000 significant enough to compromise his judgment. They had calculated his needs and motivations with the same precision they applied to researching my assets. The emotional weight of losing trust in both my parents and brother felt crushing in ways I had never experienced. Family relationships that had anchored my sense of identity and belonging were revealed as strategic partnerships where my success was viewed as shared property rather than personal achievement. Jake's participation in their scheme eliminated my last ally within the family structure. As Jake described Frank and Barbara's specific questions about my beach house, I realized they had been planning this escalation for months. They knew the property's value, understood its emotional significance to me, and had researched its potential as collateral or direct sale opportunity. Their gambling addiction had transformed them into sophisticated predators who studied their target with professional thoroughness. The conversation ended with Jake's tears and apologies, but the damage to our relationship felt permanent and irreversible. His willingness to betray my trust for money revealed character flaws I had never suspected, making me question my judgment about people I thought I knew completely. The brother who had once helped me build tree houses was now someone who would photograph my private documents for financial gain. Driving home from Jake's apartment, I felt completely alone within my own family for the first time in my life. The people who should have celebrated my success and supported my dreams had instead conspired to exploit my achievements for their own benefit. Their betrayal required me to reevaluate every interaction, every conversation, and every moment of apparent affection to determine what had been genuine versus calculated manipulation. The realization that my parents had been planning their beach house strategy for months rather than acting from sudden desperation changed my entire perspective on their behavior. This was not a crisis response, but a carefully orchestrated campaign to access my assets through whatever means necessary, including recruiting my brother as an unwitting accomplice in their criminal enterprise. My beach house in Galveston represented 2 years of careful saving and strategic planning, a reward I had given myself after reaching specific business milestones. The 3-bedroom cottage sat on stilts overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, with wraparound porches and large windows that captured both sunrise and sunset views. Every mortgage payment felt like an investment in my future happiness, a place where I could escape the demands of running a business and find peace beside rolling waves. Saturday mornings at the beach house had become sacred time for reflection and renewal. I would wake to the sound of seagulls and brewing coffee, spending hours on the deck reading business journals or simply watching fishing boats navigate the horizon. The 45-minute drive from Dallas felt like traveling to another world where deadlines and client demands couldn't reach me. That particular Saturday, I had planned to review quarterly financial reports while enjoying the ocean breeze, spreading documents across the dining room table that faced the water. Around 10 in the morning, the sound of car doors slamming disrupted my peaceful routine. Looking through the front window, I saw Frank and Barbara climbing the wooden steps to my porch with determined expressions that immediately put me on guard. Frank's demanding tone shattered the morning tranquility as he surveyed my property with obvious calculation. His eyes moved from the expensive porch furniture to the new outdoor kitchen, mentally cataloging assets with the precision of an appraiser. When he spoke the words, "Give us the keys to your beach house," his voice carried entitlement rather than request, as if my property was already rightfully his to claim. Barbara's approach differed but proved equally manipulative, focusing on emotional guilt rather than direct demands. She compared my lifestyle to their impending homelessness, describing sleepless nights worrying about foreclosure while I enjoyed luxury they could never afford. Her words painted my success as somehow stolen from them, as if my business achievements had come at their expense, rather than through my own hard work. The escalation surprised me with its calculated cruelty. When I refused to consider selling my beach house to cover their gambling debts, Frank threatened to contact Adult Protective Services with claims about my mental stability. He suggested that my refusal to help family indicated psychological problems that warranted legal intervention and possible guardianship proceedings. Barbara's fake concern felt more chilling than Frank's direct aggression. She discussed how they had noticed changes in my behavior, claiming that success had made me paranoid and unable to distinguish between reasonable family requests and imaginary threats. Her performance was convincing enough that someone unfamiliar with our situation might actually believe her concerns about my mental health. Frank revealed that they had already researched guardianship laws, understanding exactly how financial control could be transferred from me to them if they presented a compelling case about my incompetence. Their threats were not empty emotional manipulation but legally informed strategies to access my assets through court intervention if I continued refusing their demands. That evening, after my parents left with promises to return with proper documentation, I spent hours researching guardianship procedures online. The discovery that their threats had legal foundation terrified me more than their gambling debts or forgery attempts. If they could convince a judge that I was mentally unstable, they could potentially gain control over my entire financial portfolio. Barbara's research into my daily routines became apparent over the following days as they began showing up at my office, my condo, and various locations throughout my normal schedule. They documented what they claimed was erratic behavior, taking photographs and making notes about my activities that they could present as evidence of psychological instability. Frank's revelation that they had been recording our conversations added another layer to their manipulation strategy. During family dinners and phone calls over recent weeks, they had apparently captured audio that they planned to edit and present as proof of my mental deterioration. Their preparation for potential guardianship proceedings had been underway longer than I realized. The surveillance intensified throughout the week as my parents positioned themselves to document any behavior they could characterize as unstable or concerning. They followed my daily routine, noting when I worked late, when I visited clients, and when I spent time at the beach house. Their activity log was building a case against my competency with the thoroughness of professional investigators. Barbara's crocodile tears during these encounters felt particularly manipulative because they appeared genuine to outside observers. Her performance as a concerned mother worried about her daughter's mental health would be convincing in court, especially if combined with edited recordings and Jake's testimony about my behavior changes. The moment I realized they were treating me as their target rather than their daughter marked a fundamental shift in my approach to this crisis. Their willingness to destroy my reputation and freedom to maintain their gambling lifestyle revealed the true depth of their addiction and its impact on their moral judgment. They had crossed from desperate family members into active predators willing to use any weapon available. Frank's comment about my success making me mentally unstable exposed their resentment toward my achievements rather than pride in my accomplishments. They viewed my financial independence as a threat to their control, rather than a validation of values they had taught me about hard work and responsibility. My success had become their enemy because it gave me the power to refuse their unreasonable demands. The beach house represented everything I had worked to achieve, but more importantly, it symbolized my independence and self-determination. Their demand for my keys was really a demand for my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own life and property. They wanted me to surrender not just assets but my identity as a successful adult capable of managing my own affairs. Standing on my deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I realized that protecting my beach house meant protecting my freedom. Their escalating tactics required a strategic response that would expose their manipulation while safeguarding my legal and financial position. The time had come to stop defending myself and start taking decisive action to end their campaign against me. Monday morning brought clarity about the decisive action I needed to take to protect myself from my family's escalating criminal behavior. I contacted Sarah Thompson, a private investigator recommended by my attorney's office, explaining the complex situation involving forgery, fraud threats, and potential guardianship manipulation. Sarah's calm professionalism reassured me that my concerns were valid and that documentation would be crucial for any legal proceedings. My consultation with attorney Marcus Rodriguez that afternoon provided the legal framework I needed to understand my options and rights. Marcus specialized in financial crimes and family law, with extensive experience helping clients protect assets from relatives who had developed gambling or substance abuse problems. His office displayed certificates and awards that demonstrated his expertise in exactly the type of situation I was facing. Sarah's investigation began immediately, using surveillance techniques and public records research to document Frank and Barbara's activities. Within 48 hours, she had uncovered shocking evidence that transformed my understanding of their intentions and capabilities. Her findings revealed a level of criminal sophistication that went far beyond desperate gambling addiction. The most devastating discovery was that my parents had already attempted to sell my beach house through fraudulent means, working with a corrupt real estate agent named Timothy Walsh. Sarah's investigation revealed that Timothy had helped them create fake power of attorney documents authorizing the sale, despite having no legal right to represent my interests in any property transaction. Evidence showed that Frank and Barbara had researched my property ownership through public records, obtaining detailed information about mortgage amounts, tax assessments, and title history. They had used this information to create convincing documentation that nearly fooled potential buyers and their real estate agent during preliminary negotiations 3 weeks earlier. Sarah discovered that my parents had already identified potential buyers willing to purchase the beach house for 60% of its market value in a cash transaction designed to close quickly. The below-market pricing was intended to attract investors who would not ask detailed questions about the seller's authorization to complete the transaction. The fraudulent sale had only been prevented by a title company employee named Jennifer Martinez, whose due diligence revealed discrepancies in the power of attorney documentation. Jennifer's attention to detail had saved my property from theft, though I had never been notified about the attempted transaction because my parents had provided false contact information. Marcus explained that the evidence Sarah had gathered demonstrated multiple felony crimes including real estate fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The criminal penalties my parents faced could include substantial prison sentences and restitution requirements that would financially destroy them for the remainder of their lives. Sarah's investigation also revealed that Timothy Walsh had facilitated similar fraudulent property sales for other families, suggesting that my parents had connected with a criminal network rather than acting as desperate amateurs. Timothy's operation included falsified documents, fake references, and coordinated timing designed to complete transactions before victims became aware of the theft. The depth of my parents' research into my financial portfolio shocked me with its thoroughness and precision. They had obtained copies of my business bank statements, investment account summaries, and insurance policies through methods that Sarah was still investigating. Their knowledge extended beyond information Jake could have provided, indicating additional sources or methods of access. Evidence showed that Frank and Barbara had spent weeks researching my daily schedule, noting when I was most likely to be at the beach house versus my condo or office. Their surveillance had documented my routines with accuracy that would have allowed them to coordinate the fraudulent sale during times when I would be unavailable to interfere. Sarah's documentation included photographs of my parents meeting with Timothy Walsh at a coffee shop near my office, reviewing floor plans and property details that Jake had provided. The images showed them examining documents and discussing strategies with the focus of professional criminals, rather than desperate family members seeking help. The investigation revealed that Timothy Walsh had already advertised my beach house on exclusive real estate networks, describing it as a motivated seller situation with flexible terms. Potential buyers had toured the property using keys that Timothy had somehow obtained, possibly through lockpicking or previous unauthorized access to my premises. Marcus's analysis of the evidence showed that my parents' criminal activity extended beyond the immediate threat to my beach house. They had researched methods to access my business accounts, investment portfolios, and retirement funds through various legal and illegal means. Their gambling addiction had transformed them into sophisticated financial predators, targeting every asset I owned. Sarah's findings about Jake's involvement revealed that his cooperation had been more extensive than he had admitted during our confrontation. He had provided detailed photographs of my property interiors, security system information, and personal documents that supported the fraudulent sale attempt. His role was crucial to the criminal enterprise rather than peripheral assistance. The timeline of events showed that my parents had been planning this operation for at least 4 months, beginning their research and criminal partnerships long before their gambling debts reached crisis levels. Their desperation was real, but their criminal response had been carefully calculated and professionally executed rather than impulsive reactions to financial pressure. Marcus advised me that pressing charges would result in serious legal consequences for Frank, Barbara, and potentially Jake, depending on his level of cooperation with prosecutors. However, he also explained that failing to report these crimes could expose me to continued victimization and might implicate me in any future fraudulent activities they attempted. The evidence file that Sarah compiled included audio recordings, photographs, financial documents, and witness statements that would easily support criminal prosecution. Timothy Walsh's involvement provided prosecutors with additional charges and evidence, making conviction virtually certain if I decided to pursue legal action against my family members. As I reviewed the comprehensive investigation results in Marcus's office that Friday afternoon, I realized that my parents had crossed every moral and legal boundary in their pursuit of my assets. Their behavior was not motivated by desperation alone, but by entitlement and resentment toward my success. They viewed my achievements as their property, and my refusal to surrender everything as theft from them. The moment of truth was approaching when I would need to confront Frank and Barbara with this evidence and decide whether to destroy their lives through criminal prosecution or find alternative consequences that would protect me while potentially allowing them to rebuild their destroyed existence. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the choice about their future was now mine to make. The confrontation required careful planning to ensure my safety while maximizing the impact of the evidence Sarah and Marcus had compiled. I invited Frank, Barbara, and Jake to my condo for what I described as a family meeting to resolve our financial conflict permanently. The controlled environment would allow me to record everything while having legal representation present as witnesses to their admissions and reactions. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early to review our strategy and position recording equipment strategically throughout my living room. Sarah brought additional documentation and positioned herself to photograph any evidence my family might produce during the confrontation. The preparation felt surreal, like staging a business presentation, except the stakes involved my family's freedom and my financial survival. When Frank and Barbara arrived with Jake trailing reluctantly behind them, their confident expressions suggested they expected another opportunity to pressure me into compliance. They carried folders and documents, apparently prepared to present new demands or threats designed to break my resistance. Their body language conveyed certainty that this meeting would end with my surrender to their terms. I began methodically presenting evidence of their criminal activities, starting with photographs of forged documents and audio recordings of their threats about guardianship proceedings. Frank's face shifted from confidence to concern as he recognized his own voice discussing strategies to have me declared mentally incompetent. Barbara's hands trembled as she realized the scope of documentation I had gathered. The presentation of Timothy Walsh's confession about their real estate fraud attempt created the first crack in their defensive facade. Frank's angry denial crumbled when I showed photographs of their meetings, detailed floor plans they had provided, and advertising materials Timothy had created for my beach house. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Barbara's breakdown began when I played recordings of her threatening to fabricate evidence about my mental health. Her own words describing how they would convince authorities that I needed guardianship sounded cruel and calculating when played back in the sterile environment of legal documentation. She had not realized how her manipulation tactics would appear to objective listeners. Jake's shock at learning about Timothy Walsh and the attempted property sale revealed that my parents had compartmentalized their criminal activities, sharing information only on a need-to-know basis. His horror at discovering the true scope of their fraud suggested that his cooperation had been based on incomplete understanding of their intentions and methods. The moment arrived for my revelation, the evidence that would completely reframe their understanding of the situation and their potential success. I pulled out a leather portfolio containing legal documents that I had kept secret for months, waiting for exactly this type of confrontation. The ownership papers inside would demonstrate my preparation and foresight in protecting my assets. Frank and Barbara's expressions shifted to confusion as I explained that all my properties had been transferred into an irrevocable trust 6 months earlier, based on advice from my attorney about protecting assets from family financial predators. The trust named me as the primary beneficiary, but removed my legal ability to transfer ownership under any circumstances, including duress or court orders. The stunning disclosure revealed that their months of planning, research, and criminal activity had been worthless from the beginning. Even if they had successfully forged documents or obtained guardianship, the trust structure would have prevented them from accessing my properties. My attorney had anticipated their strategies and created legal barriers that could not be overcome through any means available to them. Marcus's explanation of the trust mechanics left Frank speechless with rage and frustration. The irrevocable nature meant that even I could not dissolve the trust to give them property, regardless of threats, manipulation, or legal proceedings they might initiate. Their criminal enterprise had been doomed to failure before it began, though they had continued pursuing it with increasing desperation. Barbara's humiliation at realizing I had anticipated their betrayal months in advance was visible in her flushed face and inability to maintain eye contact. The daughter they had underestimated had been several steps ahead of their schemes, protecting herself while allowing them to reveal their true intentions through their criminal behavior. Jake's apologies and pleas for forgiveness reflected his genuine remorse for participating in activities he now understood were serious crimes. His cooperation with Frank and Barbara had been based on incomplete information and financial pressure, but his regret appeared authentic when faced with the full scope of their criminal conspiracy. The shift in power dynamics was complete as Marcus detailed the criminal charges my parents faced based on documented evidence. Real estate fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and forgery carried potential prison sentences that would effectively end their lives as free individuals. The gambling debts that had started their criminal behavior seemed insignificant compared to the legal consequences they now faced. Frank's rage at discovering his powerlessness erupted in accusations and threats that further incriminated him, while Sarah recorded every word. His inability to accept that I had outmaneuvered their schemes revealed the depth of his entitlement and resentment toward my independence. He had expected me to remain vulnerable to their manipulation indefinitely. Barbara's final desperate attempts at emotional manipulation fell flat in the presence of documented evidence about her calculated cruelty and criminal behavior. Her tears could not erase recordings of her threats or photographs of her participating in fraud conspiracies. The loving mother persona had been permanently replaced by evidence of her predatory behavior. The confrontation concluded with my ultimatum, carefully crafted with Marcus's legal guidance to provide them with alternatives to criminal prosecution. They could voluntarily enter residential gambling addiction treatment programs and agree to 2 years of no contact, or face immediate criminal charges with virtually certain conviction and imprisonment. Their forced acceptance of my terms marked the end of their campaign against my assets and autonomy. Frank and Barbara's recognition that they had no leverage remaining left them with only the choice between treatment and prison. The family dynamics that had governed our relationships for decades were permanently altered by their criminal behavior and my successful defense. As Marcus escorted them from my condo with signed agreements for treatment programs and no-contact orders, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness about the destruction of relationships that had once been central to my identity. The parents who had raised me were gone, replaced by desperate criminals who had viewed my success as their salvation rather than their daughter's achievement. Frank and Barbara's departure for the 90-day residential gambling addiction program in Arizona marked the beginning of their long journey toward accountability and potential redemption. The Phoenix facility specialized in treating gambling disorders with underlying psychological components, requiring participants to address not only addictive behaviors, but also the moral compromises and criminal thinking patterns that gambling addiction often creates. My decision to file police reports without pursuing immediate prosecution created an official record that would protect me from future accusations, while giving Frank and Barbara the opportunity to demonstrate genuine change through treatment completion. Detective Rodriguez at Dallas Police Department assured me that the documentation would remain available if their behavior escalated again after treatment. Timothy Walsh's arrest and prosecution proceeded independently of my family's case, providing validation that my experience was part of a larger criminal operation targeting vulnerable property owners. His conviction on multiple counts of real estate fraud resulted in a 5-year prison sentence and restitution orders that would help other victims recover their losses from his criminal enterprise. Jake's transformation began with individual counseling to understand how his financial desperation had made him vulnerable to manipulation by people he trusted. His therapist helped him recognize warning signs of exploitation and develop healthier boundaries around money and family relationships. Jake's commitment to rebuilding trust included complete transparency about his finances and family communications. The resolution of my immediate crisis allowed me to refocus energy on expanding my business into new markets I had been researching before. The family drama consumed my attention. 3 new corporate clients signed contracts within 6 weeks, generating revenue that exceeded my projections for the entire quarter. Professional success felt more meaningful when achieved without family manipulation and guilt. My decision to sell the childhood home rather than continue using it as a rental property symbolized my release from obligations that had kept me emotionally tied to my parents' dysfunction. The sale proceeds went into my trust fund, further protecting my assets while providing additional financial security for my future. The establishment of written boundaries for future family contact provided clarity about conditions under which relationships might be rebuilt. Frank and Barbara would need to complete treatment, maintain sobriety, make full restitution for their crimes, and demonstrate consistent respect for my autonomy before any meaningful contact could be considered. Therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams helped me process the trauma of betrayal by people who should have supported my success rather than exploiting it. Dr. Williams specialized in family financial abuse, a surprisingly common form of domestic violence that often goes unrecognized because society expects unconditional family loyalty, regardless of harmful behavior. 6 months after the confrontation, Frank's first letter from treatment arrived with a genuine apology that acknowledged the specific impacts of his criminal behavior on my life and well-being. His recognition that gambling addiction did not excuse forgery, fraud, or emotional manipulation represented the first step toward possible redemption through accountability and changed behavior. Barbara's separate therapy focused on her enabling behaviors and her own accountability for criminal activities rather than just supporting Frank's addiction. Her eventual understanding that she had actively participated in crimes against her daughter, rather than simply standing by helplessly, marked a crucial breakthrough in her personal responsibility and potential for genuine change. Jake's efforts to help other families recognize financial abuse patterns led to his volunteer work with a nonprofit organization that educated communities about elder abuse and family financial exploitation. His personal experience with manipulation tactics made him an effective advocate for vulnerable individuals facing similar pressures from relatives or trusted individuals. My beach house became a sanctuary where I hosted support groups for adult children who had experienced financial abuse from family members. The peaceful environment and my personal story of successful resistance provided hope and practical strategies for people struggling with similar betrayals and guilt about protecting themselves from family predators. Business expansion allowed me to develop educational content about asset protection and family boundary setting through my marketing platform. The intersection of my professional expertise and personal experience created valuable resources for clients who needed guidance about protecting their success from those who would exploit their achievements. New friendships with Sarah and Marcus evolved beyond professional relationships into genuine connections based on mutual respect and shared values. Their support during my crisis had demonstrated the difference between people who celebrated my success and those who resented it, helping me understand healthy relationship dynamics versus exploitative ones. The transformation of crisis into opportunity for authentic relationships and personal empowerment represented the most valuable outcome of surviving my family's criminal behavior. Protecting myself from people who viewed my success as their entitlement had created space for relationships based on reciprocity, respect, and genuine care, rather than obligation and manipulation. Educational workshops I began hosting through local business organizations helped other entrepreneurs recognize warning signs of family financial abuse before it escalated to criminal levels. My story resonated with audiences because family exploitation remains a taboo topic despite its frequency among successful individuals whose relatives view their achievements as shared resources. Frank's completion of treatment after 90 days led to his enrollment in ongoing outpatient counseling and Gamblers Anonymous meetings that would continue indefinitely. His recognition that rebuilding trust with me would require years of consistent behavior rather than apologies represented mature acceptance of consequences for his choices. Barbara's individual therapy continued beyond Frank's treatment program as she addressed deeper issues about entitlement, manipulation, and emotional abuse that had existed long before gambling addiction became their primary problem. Her therapist helped her understand how enabling behaviors were actually forms of abuse that harmed everyone involved. The ultimate lesson emerging from this painful experience centered on the difference between helping family members who respected my boundaries versus enabling family members who exploited my success. True family loyalty meant protecting myself from those who would destroy me financially and emotionally, while remaining open to relationships based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. My reflection on the complete transformation of family dynamics revealed that some relationships require distance or termination when they become harmful to our well-being and success. The guilt society places on individuals who protect themselves from family abuse often prevents people from taking necessary steps to preserve their safety, autonomy, and achievements. 2 years later, limited contact with Frank and Barbara resumed under strict conditions that prioritized my safety and respected my boundaries. Their consistent adherence to treatment recommendations and genuine accountability for their criminal behavior created the foundation for cautious rebuilding of relationships that honored my independence and success rather than threatening it. The beach house remained my sanctuary, now shared with friends who celebrated my achievements rather than viewing them as opportunities for exploitation. Watching sunsets from my deck while surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my happiness represented the peace and fulfillment that comes from protecting yourself from those who would harm you while opening your heart to those who support your growth. Have you ever had to protect yourself from family members who viewed your success as their entitlement rather than your achievement? Learning to distinguish between helping and enabling can be one of life's most difficult but necessary lessons. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Like this story if it resonated with your experience. Subscribe for more content about family boundaries and financial protection. And share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that self-protection is not selfishness when dealing with people who would exploit your kindness and success. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery about the importance of healthy boundaries, and I wish you the strength to protect your achievements while remaining open to relationships that truly support your happiness and growth.